Nobody expected a late-night comedian to turn a presidential attack into a live courtroom. But that night, Jimmy Kimmel didn't just respond to Donald Trump's attempt to destroy his credibility. He put a timer on screen, asked one question, and watched the most powerful man in American politics fail to answer it for 30 straight seconds on a live phone call. And the silence, where the answer should have been, that was louder than anything either of them said. The studio felt ordinary at first, almost too ordinary. The band had just wrapped their opening set, the last chord still ringing faintly through the monitors as the applause faded into that comfortable, expectant hum that fills a late-night audience when they're settled in and ready for the show. Overhead lights threw their usual warm glow across the polished desk surface, catching the edge of a coffee mug, the neat stack of cue cards, the small monitor angled just out of camera view. Crew members moved behind the production wall in quiet, practiced rhythms, adjusting levels, checking feeds, murmuring into headsets. Everything looked routine. Everything sounded routine. The kind of night where you'd expect a few political jokes, a celebrity interview, maybe a funny bit with an audience member, and then credits. But something was different tonight, and the people who had been in that studio long enough to read the signs could feel it before Kimmel even appeared. The card stack on the desk was thicker than usual. A printed page sat face down next to the mug, separate from the regular notes. And the production screen behind the desk, the one usually reserved for comedy graphics and pre-taped bits, was dark. Not off. Dark. Waiting. Jimmy Kimmel walked out from behind the curtain, and the crowd surged the way they always did. Applause, a few whistles, scattered shouts from the upper rows. He waved once, adjusted his jacket, sat down with that familiar, easy drop into the chair that he'd perfected over 2 decades of doing exactly this. His smile was there. His energy was there. But there was something underneath it tonight, something coiled and patient, like a man who had already decided exactly what he was going to do and was simply waiting for the right moment to begin. He opened with 2 jokes, quick, clean, perfectly timed. One about a celebrity scandal, one about a ridiculous news headline. The audience laughed easily, bodies relaxing into the familiar rhythm. This was the Kimmel they knew. This was comfortable. This was safe. The energy in the room softened, loosened, settled into that pleasant groove where everyone stops bracing for impact and simply enjoys the ride. And that was exactly the moment he pivoted. His hand reached to the side of the desk and came back holding a single printed page. He held it up, not dramatically, not like a reveal, just casually, the way someone holds up a receipt they've been meaning to look at. The audience barely registered it at first. Just another prop, just another bit. But then Kimmel started reading, and the temperature in the studio dropped 5 degrees in 3 seconds. He read Donald Trump's words back to the room, slowly, carefully, without impression, without mockery, without the exaggerated voice that comedians usually use when quoting politicians. Just the raw words, delivered in Kimmel's own steady voice, stripped of everything except their actual meaning. Trump had called him a paid propagandist, had said he was reading scripts written by intelligence agencies, had called him talentless, dishonest, a tool of corrupt networks, a man lying to America every single night for ratings, had said he should have been fired years ago, had dismissed him as a nasty person doing nasty work for nasty people. Kimmel read every word. Then he set the page down on the desk, flat, face up, visible to the camera. He placed it there the way a lawyer places an exhibit on a table. Not thrown, not tossed, placed, deliberately, like evidence. The audience had gone quiet, not silent, quiet. The difference matters. Silent means shocked. Quiet means listening. And they were listening hard, because something in the way Kimmel handled that page told them this was not going to be a standard political joke segment. This was going to be something else entirely. Kimmel looked up from the page and said one line that reframed the entire night. When a man can't beat the joke, he tries to beat the teller. The words landed with a weight that surprised even the people who were already paying close attention. It wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. It was just true. And the truth of it hung in the air like something solid, something you could almost reach out and touch. He explained it simply. Trump didn't attack his comedy this time. He didn't mock the punchlines or challenge the jokes or try to out-funny the funny man. He attacked Kimmel's credibility, and that choice, Kimmel said, was the most important detail of the entire exchange. Because credibility is what makes a comedian dangerous. Not the jokes themselves, not the delivery, not the timing or the writing or the production value. Credibility, the audience's belief that when the comedian holds up a mirror, the reflection is real. Destroy that belief, and the mirror becomes harmless. Discredit the person holding it, and it doesn't matter what the reflection shows, because nobody trusts the glass anymore. That, Kimmel said, is Trump's favorite battlefield. Not facts, not evidence, not the actual substance of what was said. Credibility, because it's always easier to accuse than to answer. It's always easier to call someone a liar than to prove them wrong. It's always easier to poison the narrator than to fix the story. Then he asked a question so simple it felt almost unfair. He looked around the studio, making eye contact with the front rows, then turning to the camera with the kind of directness that makes a person watching at home feel like they're being spoken to individually. If Trump is so sure I'm lying, he said, why doesn't he correct one specific thing? Just one. One date I got wrong, one quote I misattributed, one clip I took out of context, one fact, one detail, one single checkable piece of information that I put on this show that turns out to be false. Just one. The room went still, not because the question was complicated, because it was devastatingly simple, and everyone in that studio, from the front row to the production booth, immediately understood the implication. If the answer existed, Trump would have used it. He always uses ammunition when he has it. The fact that he went after Kimmel's character instead of Kimmel's facts said everything about which one he could actually challenge. Then Kimmel did something that changed the entire format of the segment. He pressed a button on the desk, and the dark screen behind him came to life. 3 columns appeared in clean, simple text: claim, source, verification. No graphics, no flashy animation, no comedy font. Just a plain, readable grid that looked more like a courtroom exhibit than a late-night comedy prop. He said he wasn't going to ask anyone to trust him. That was the whole point. Trust is what Trump was trying to destroy, so the answer couldn't be more trust. The answer had to be something anyone could check for themselves. First claim on the grid: Trump's statement that nobody watches Kimmel, that the ratings were terrible, that the show was dying and should have been canceled years ago. Kimmel didn't argue with it. He didn't pull up his own numbers or brag about viewership or get defensive about ratings the way Trump clearly expected him to. Instead, he pulled up Trump's own posts, one after another, screenshots appearing on the screen. Trump quoting Kimmel's exact monologue lines, Trump responding to specific jokes, Trump referencing segments by name, by date, by content, post after post after post, each one proving that Trump didn't just watch the show. He watched it closely. He watched it carefully. He watched it the way someone watches something that's getting under their skin so deeply they can't look away, even when they want to. Under the verification column, the box filled itself with 3 words: watched enough to react. The crowd roared. Not just laughter, recognition, the kind of reaction that comes when something obvious has been hiding in plain sight, and someone finally points at it and says, look. Second claim: Trump's statement that Kimmel was paid to lie, that he was reading scripts from shadowy forces, that the whole operation was a propaganda machine disguised as entertainment. Kimmel didn't speculate about Trump's motives, didn't call him paranoid, didn't mock the conspiracy angle. He simply read his own on-air disclaimer, the one he gives regularly, the one that says plainly that he is a comedian, not a prosecutor, not a journalist, not an investigator, and that everything he presents on the show comes from publicly available reporting, published clips, and documented statements that anyone with an internet connection can verify for themselves. Then he pulled up Trump's fundraising emails, the ones sent to supporters, the ones asking for money, and he showed the language. Every critic labeled bought, every journalist labeled corrupt, every comedian, commentator, analyst, and anchor who ever said anything unfavorable, described as paid, controlled, scripted, and compromised. Kimmel let the pattern sit on screen for a moment, then said one line that cut through everything else. If everyone who disagrees with him is bought, then the only unpaid person left in America is the guy selling you the story. The audience laughed, but it was a different kind of laugh now, sharper, tighter, the kind that comes from seeing something clearly for the first time and realizing it was always there, just never framed this simply before. And then came the moment that ended everything. Kimmel straightened in his chair. His expression shifted. The last traces of comedy drained from his face, replaced by something closer to a dare. He said he wanted to try something. He called it the credibility test. 30 seconds, one question, no detours, no insults, no pivots, no distractions, just one simple, direct, answerable question. A timer appeared on the screen behind him. 30 seconds, large, clean numbers, impossible to ignore. He looked into the camera and spoke directly to Donald Trump, wherever he was watching, because they both knew he was watching. "You've accused me of lying," Kimmel said. His voice was level, almost gentle, the way someone speaks when they already know the answer to the question they're about to ask. "Great. Name one sentence I've said on this show this week that is false, just one, and give the correct version." That's it. One sentence, one correction, 30 seconds. The timer started, and then something happened that nobody in that studio, not the crew, not the audience, not even Kimmel himself by the look on his face, had fully expected. The studio phone lit up. The audience gasped, a genuine, sharp intake of breath that moved through the room like a wave. Kimmel looked at the phone, looked at the camera, looked at the phone again. Then, with a calm that bordered on theatrical but somehow felt completely authentic, he reached over and put it on speaker. Trump's voice filled the studio like a thunderclap, loud, fast, already running hot before the first complete sentence had even formed. He called the show fake comedy. He called the network corrupt. He called the people involved nasty, terrible, dishonest people doing dishonest work for dishonest reasons. The words came out tangled, overlapping, crashing into each other like waves in a storm, each one trying to arrive before the last one finished. Kimmel didn't argue, didn't interrupt, didn't raise his voice. He simply lifted one hand, pointed at the timer still counting down on the screen behind him, and repeated the question. Which sentence was false? Trump pivoted to insults, called Kimmel a loser, called the audience brainwashed, called the whole thing a setup designed to make him look bad. Kimmel pointed at the timer again. Which sentence was false? Trump pivoted to ratings, said his own numbers were higher, said nobody cared about late-night television anymore, said the whole industry was dying and taking Kimmel with it. Kimmel pointed at the timer one more time. His voice hadn't changed, his posture hadn't changed, his expression hadn't changed. The same question, delivered 3 times, in exactly the same tone, with exactly the same calm, while the man on the other end of the phone got louder, faster, more frantic with every passing second. Which sentence was false? The audience started laughing, not at the joke. There were no jokes. They were laughing because the dodge had become visible, completely, undeniably, painfully visible. The timer had turned chaos into measurement. It had turned noise into silence. It had created a frame around the one thing that wasn't happening, a specific correction, and made its absence impossible to ignore. The seconds kept ticking, Trump kept talking, but the words had stopped mattering because everyone in that studio and everyone watching at home was now listening for only one thing. A specific fact, a specific correction, a specific sentence identified as false with a specific replacement offered as true. And it wasn't coming. It wasn't coming because it didn't exist. And every second that passed without it made that absence louder than anything Trump was shouting into the phone. Ding! The timer hit 0. Kimmel lifted both hands, palms up, calm, completely, impossibly calm. He looked at the audience, then at the camera, and said 2 words. That's the answer. The studio erupted, not the quick burst that follows a punchline. A deep rolling wave of applause and shouts and recognition that built from the front rows and crashed backward through the entire room. People were on their feet in places. Others were leaning forward, hands on knees, shaking their heads with the kind of expression that says, I just watched something I won't forget. Trump was still talking. His voice was still coming through the speaker, still loud, still fast, still firing in every direction except the one direction that would have ended the whole thing. But the audience wasn't listening to the shouting anymore. They were listening to the silence around it, the silence where the answer should have been, the silence that said more than any accusation, any insult, any rally rant, any midnight post ever could. Kimmel let the moment breathe. He didn't rush to fill the space. He didn't crack a joke to lighten the tension. He let the weight of what had just happened settle into every corner of the studio, like dust after something collapses. Then he spoke again, quietly, directly, without any trace of comedy left in his voice. He can't correct the record, Kimmel said, so he attacks the person holding it. That's not strength. That's not confidence. That's not the behavior of someone who has the truth on their side. That's what happens when someone knows the mirror is accurate and their only option is to break the glass. Trump shouted something else through the speaker. Kimmel glanced at the phone with a look that carried more weight than any punchline. The kind of look a teacher gives a student who just proved the lesson without meaning to. Then he thanked Trump for calling, reached over, and ended the call himself. The click of the line going dead was one of the loudest sounds that studio had ever heard. Kimmel turned back to the camera. The room was still buzzing, still processing, still riding the energy of what had just happened. But he wasn't finished. He had one more thing to say, and the way he said it made it clear this was the part he had been building toward from the moment he walked out from behind that curtain. Credibility, he said, isn't something you claim. It's something you survive when people check you. He let that sentence sit alone for a moment. Let it stand on its own without context or explanation, because it didn't need either. It was complete by itself. A definition so simple and so accurate that trying to add to it would only make it smaller. Then he added the final layer. He leaned toward the camera, and his voice dropped to something close to a whisper, not for drama, but for emphasis. The kind of emphasis that comes from speaking softer so people have to lean in to hear you. He warned the audience, not about Trump specifically, about the method. He said not to fall for the pattern. Don't fall for secret document rumors that can never be sourced. Don't fall for personal smears designed to make you disgusted before you've checked whether they're true. Don't fall for claims that exist only in screenshots of screenshots, shared by accounts that didn't exist last month, pushed into your feed at the exact moment they're most likely to make you angry enough to stop thinking. Because that, he said, is how credibility gets poisoned. Not with a single lie, with a flood of them, each one too outrageous to ignore and too slippery to pin down, until the audience is so exhausted, so overwhelmed, so sick of trying to tell truth from fiction that they stop trying altogether. And once they stop trying, whoever is doing the lying wins. He told the audience to judge him by the same standard. He said it plainly, without performance, without the safety net of humor. If I ever say something wrong on this show, he said, don't let me get away with it. Demand the correction, on air, in public, with the same timer and the same question, because that's the only way any of this works. Not by trusting the person behind the desk, by checking them and watching whether they survived the check. The applause that followed wasn't loud in the way studio audiences usually get loud. It was firm, solid. The kind of response that sounds less like entertainment and more like a decision being made collectively by a room full of people who just watched something that changed the way they think about everything they're going to hear tomorrow. Kimmel shuffled the cards on his desk, took a breath, and let the quietest version of his smile return. The kind that says the hard part is over, but the meaning will last. If you want to know who's lying, he said, watch who avoids the simplest correction. That's always the tell. Not the volume, not the insults, not the performance. The correction that never comes. That's where the truth lives. The audience held the applause one more time, long and steady, before the band finally eased into the transition. And for one clear, undeniable moment, a late-night comedy desk had become something no press conference, no rally, and no social media post had managed to be. A place where the question was asked, the time was given, and the silence told the whole story. If this moment made you sit up straighter, hit subscribe and ring the bell. These are not just late-night clips. They are the moments where the machinery of power gets tested in real time. Drop a comment and tell us which part stayed with you the longest. And stay close, because the next one asks a question nobody in Washington is ready to answer.